Mr. Majority Leader, Mr. President Pro Tem, Mr. Minority Leader, friends, loved ones, and honored guests. Good morning and welcome to the 74th General Assembly of the Colorado State Senate. It's an honor to be with you all today as we find ourselves at the outset of what promises to be a challenging yet rewarding 120 days. Before we get started, though, I invite you all to look around and take a second to appreciate the changes that have been made during the interim to the Senate chamber. Spearheaded by our indomitable Secretary, Cindy Markwell, whose commitment is unrivaled, we have spruced things up a little bit. All of the member desks, the front desk, and virtually every piece of wood in this chamber was hauled off, stripped, and brought back to its original shine. Countless improvements, including new steel reinforced floors. We even gave the lobby a little bit of an upgrade, uncovering and bringing back the original stenciling. But another priority of these improvements was to make our historic Senate chamber, our place of business, more accessible to those with different abilities. We've installed T-coils throughout so folks with hearing impairments can receive a direct audio feed into their hearing aids. We removed a level from the floor. Some of you, I've noticed, keep looking for that step that has been removed. And a ramp has been custom built for the one step that does remain on the chamber floor. We've also laid the groundwork for the next phase of accessibility improvements, which will include an adjustable podium in the well and either a ramp or a lift up to the president's dais. All of this was done with an eye towards ensuring this historic, beloved chamber in the People's House evolves to be a more welcoming and inclusive space. So I hope you'll enjoy the new and improved Senate. I know I will. And with the election behind us, I'm actually finally settling in to not just the chamber, but finally settling into my office a little bit. I'm unpacking boxes, a fresh coat of paint. I may even get some new drapes. And actually, Senator Lundeen, I believe you measured them recently. If you could let me know what those measurements were so I could just order those easily, that would be very helpful. In all seriousness, the fact that we can convene here today with a level of normalcy, a sense of relative safety in the context of having one of the strongest economies in the country, it's nothing short of amazing. And we should all be incredibly grateful. But it's been a long journey, and that journey for Colorado's families and businesses is obviously still far from over. The past couple of years have been tough, not just because of the global pandemic and the economic impacts of that pandemic, but also the rise in political violence, instability, and hate of all kinds. Last November, we added another horrific chapter to the long history of hate and violence that sometimes occurs in the state of Colorado. 5 beautiful lives were murdered, and countless others were forever altered. A community was attacked and shaken to its core. To our LGBTQ friends, family, and loved ones, know this: we will stand with you no matter what. From a suburban high school to a midnight movie showing to a neighborhood grocery store, far too many families have suffered through the unimaginable pain of having someone murdered by gun violence while they were just simply going about their lives. But we also must remember that the vast majority of gun deaths don't make the national news. They're the thousands of lives that end alone after a long battle that was raging within them, or the thousands of lives that were taken as a result of crime and violence on the streets within our communities. As leaders in our state, it is our job to solve the problems facing our constituents and our communities. We lost more than 1,000 Coloradans to gun violence in 2021. That's unacceptable. We owe it to each of those victims and their families to do more. Yes, it is a mental health issue, but it's also an economic justice issue, and a public safety issue, and an education issue. And yes, it's also a gun issue. That is why this session we will prioritize preventing gun violence. Among other bills we'll consider, Senator Sullivan will introduce a bill to expand and improve Colorado's extreme risk protection orders. So if local law enforcement can't or won't be the ones to bring the issue to a judge, others, like district attorneys and counselors, can and will. Nobody is saying that Coloradans don't have the right to defend themselves and own a gun. We're saying that in a civilized society where people expect the freedom to live with basic security and safety, we must be willing to consider that there are some people who are not fit to possess a deadly weapon because of the extreme risk they pose to themselves and others. And for those who can't or won't secure your firearms, either at home or in your vehicle, perhaps you're not the responsible gun owner you think you are. Guns have no place in the hands of children, criminals, or those who aren't well. And if you're the reason they're entering those hands, you're part of the problem. We must do more as a society to protect innocent lives. We owe it to Raymond Vance, to Kelly Loving, to Daniel Aston, to Derek Rump, and to Ashley Paw. We owe it to Javad and Vivian. We owe it to Alex. I'd also like to take a moment to remember a leader from the other chamber who left us far too soon. Like all of you, I was shocked to hear that we lost the House Minority Leader, Hugh McKean, our dear friend. Hugh was a good man, a loving father, and a dedicated public servant. He had a huge heart, and he used his own unique blend of humor and hard work to break down barriers and try to solve problems. This session, let's embrace Hugh's approach to our work. More jokes, more smiles, more love. Let's do what Hugh did every single day. Take our work seriously, but not ourselves. As we begin to map out the path before us for these 120 days, I think it's important to take stock of where we've been so we can better understand where we're going. We've been through a deadly pandemic, a public health emergency, the likes of which we haven't seen for over a century, and that stole more from us than any of us will ever truly understand. We've endured an escalating housing crisis that's priced countless families out of their communities and put thousands out of their homes entirely. We've seen shootings, mudslides, fires, crime waves, and more. Heck, we even watched in horror as an attempted insurrection was mounted on the U.S. Capitol. But time and time again, the people of Colorado have shown their toughness and their resiliency in the face of disaster. Because we've also had wonderful rainstorms, beautiful days spent outside with loved ones. We've graduated from school, landed jobs, bought homes, gotten married, had kids. Some of us had our hair grow gray. We've loved together, mourned together, and persevered together. Colorado has had more good days than bad, and it's our mission to make sure that there are even more good days to come. We have before us an awesome and humbling opportunity to be change makers. But let's be honest, everyone in this room is here for slightly different reasons. One person's progress may be another's backslide. But regardless of why you are here, how you are here will determine whether this session is a success or not. Will we pursue grievance and anger, to accuse and betray and lay blame while shirking responsibility? Or will we search for understanding and compassion? and seek compromise and progress? Will we play politics and preen for the cameras? Or will we put those differences aside, roll up our sleeves, and govern? Will we listen to our better angels? Or will our demons consume us and foil any chance we have at consensus? Clearly, we are living in hyper-partisan and polarized times. And at times, it probably seems like our differences are so vast that there's no way we could meet each other halfway. But I wager that this democratic process, specifically the legislative process, as flawed and imperfect as it is, provides us the antidote to what often seems like a toxic and poisoned political process. This session, let's do what the Senate was designed to do. Slow down when needed, authentically deliberate, maybe take an occasional nap, and solve real problems for real people. Let's not rush to judgment because of who the sponsor is, the title of the bill, or the party that's supporting it. Not only is this what our constituents would prefer, it's also, I would say, in the spirit of the rules and procedures that govern our work. The legislative process was never meant to be a sport with two teams. It was not designed to have a predetermined outcome simply based on which team had more players on the field. The Senate was intended to be a body that genuinely deliberated, sometimes painstakingly so, in order to reach the outcome that was most acceptable to the most number of people. The idea was to counter the Hobbesian theory that humans left to their own devices are fundamentally selfish and power-hungry, which is why the legislative process was designed to prevent one person from accumulating too much authority or influence or power. Instead, it distributes that power and authority throughout. After all, the essence of majority rule, the cornerstone of the parliamentary process, is the ultimate guardrail against a small minority claiming too much influence. But I think there's a flaw in these assumptions. It ignores the fact that in the political sphere, the main human characteristic we should be cognizant of isn't that humans are selfish. It's that humans are groupish. We follow the thinking of our group. There are different names for this these days: tribalism, partisanship, identity politics, us versus them mentality. It goes on. Obviously, self-selecting into identities or affinities is not a bad thing. Quite the contrary, actually. It can lead to incredible value and powerful aspects of the human experience. Altruism, looking out for each other in a community, and of course the most essential parts of being human, the development of culture. But in the context of politics, it can lead to some problematic behaviors and patterns. It leads us to what scientists call post hoc rationalization. This is a fancy way to describe that we often make a decision not based on reason or based on facts, but based on a gut reaction, kind of based on what we think our group or our tribe thinks we should decide. In other words, all too often we have a knee-jerk opinion first, and then we rationalize why we're right second. Rather than being open to changing our mind, it seems that it's much more advantageous in today's politics to defend a position at all costs, even if the facts don't support it. This causes people to dig in and defend our original beliefs, rather than change their minds when presented with contradictory evidence. Taken to its extreme, it can have a devastating effect on democratic norms, hence why vast portions of America still vehemently believe that Donald Trump won the 2020 election, despite all evidence pointing to the contrary. So how do we break this cycle? How do we deliberate, as the founders of the process intended us to do, and reach the best policy outcomes rather than simply pursue a policy that reinforces a worldview? How do we, as 35 individuals in just one American legislative chamber, begin to stop a pattern of behavior that is plaguing our politics and keeping us from simply just working towards creating the most good? How do we turn us versus them into out of many, one. I think it's actually quite simple. It turns out that we are much more likely to grow or change our minds when we know and understand the other people that have different views. That's how we begin to see that the other isn't an enemy. They simply have different life experiences, different traditions, and different values that they hold sacred. If we better understand why someone else thinks the way they do, it helps us find the common ground necessary to begin problem solving together. We don't need to abandon or turn our backs on our tribe, but we need to build fewer walls and more bridges between tribes. We need to build authentic relationships with those who are outside our insular groups. In other words, we need to become friends. So that's my challenge for all of us this year. Build those relationships, especially because it was so much harder to do these last couple of years in the middle of a pandemic and sometimes in the middle of a polarizing election cycle. But now, get that beer after a long committee hearing. Sit in each other's offices and get lost in conversation. Visit each other in our districts, get to know each other's families. If we can commit to doing the most human thing possible that we as people can do, building relationships, then we're more likely to solve problems not as Democrats or Republicans, but as Coloradans. And if we can do that, it can have a bigger impact than on just us. Because when we show that to our respective communities, that we truly know each other, that we respect each other, and that from time to time we can change each other's minds and be open to compromise, collaboration, and maybe even consensus, it reinforces to our tribes that intentional deliberation isn't a foregone idea. It's still something we can do in American politics. I would argue that not only can we do this, but we have a moral responsibility to do it. The level of polarization and divisiveness in American politics today requires those with the power to reduce polarization to do so. The 35 of us here today have a unique role to play. We are leaders of our groups, so let's find the courage to stop seeing ourselves as foot soldiers of those groups, stop being performative because it gains retweets or social status within said group, and instead use that position of privilege, respect, and honor that we've been given to do something that America desperately needs. Reduce the volume, retract the hate, and remove the polarization. Given the events in our country in recent years, given the rise in political violence, the anger and distrust and lies, I think this is not just a nice thing that we should do. I think the fate of our democracy quite literally depends on it. One simple way to start. From time to time, I encourage you to do this simple exercise. Pick up a bill that's scheduled soon for your committee. Read it cover to cover without reading the title or looking at who the sponsors are or reading the bill summary. You might find that you identify amendments or modifications to the policy that you otherwise wouldn't, or you might even find yourself voting for a bill that you otherwise wouldn't. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying any of us should check our beliefs or agendas at the door. That would be foolish and is not what this job is actually about. We are here to fight for what we believe in. For instance, I'm not advocating to my party that we should not really take these historic majorities and just decide not to utilize it. The voters clearly gave us a mandate. A mandate for what? I think there's probably 23 different opinions about that. But let's talk about that. What should we be taking from this past election that sent us here today? Clearly, the electorate was sending a message. They weren't wholeheartedly endorsing everything that my party was selling, nor were they embracing everything that we've done in recent years. That's true. But in my opinion, voters were sending us a crystal clear message on a few issues that felt increasingly existential to them. Number one, our democracy. Voters said stop it with the conspiracy theories. Stop it with the grifting. And stop it with the politically inspired violence. And so this year, we will defend Colorado's gold standard for elections. And we will continue to make improvements so that every eligible voter who wants to vote will vote. Number two, choice. Coloradans have made up their minds. A woman's choice is a woman's choice. No ifs, ands, or buts. And so this year, we will further expand protections for women's access to reproductive health care. And for all of those Republican candidates who saw the polling that we saw and changed their tune maybe a little bit towards the end of the election, and they said, abortion is a settled question in Colorado. Let's not talk about that. Well, you're in luck, because this session, you will have the opportunity to vote to further expand protections for women's reproductive health care. Number three, climate. The existential threat of climate change is wreaking havoc on our communities, livelihoods, and lives. To those who lost their homes in one of the many devastating fires in recent years, there is no question. We are causing immense changes to our climate, and we must reverse course as soon as possible. So this year, we will continue to bring down our emissions, prioritize getting our air quality under control, conserving and improving water quality, and do everything we can to protect our landscapes from devastating wildfires. But what about the areas that maybe aren't so cut and dry? We heard a lot about crime and public safety, about the rapidly rising cost of living in Colorado, and of course, about the important issues in Colorado's classrooms, like critical cat theory, and children embracing the dangerous ideology of furries. For what it's worth, here's my perspective on those issues. On the issue of public safety, we can't ignore the unmistakable reality that the rates of some crimes have gone up. Every single one of us have either had a car stolen or a close friend who had theirs stolen recently. People rely on their car for their jobs and livelihoods. Let's work together this year to pass real policy that ends this spike in crime. But let's also recognize that there are societal problems that lead to the stealing of a car that aren't just going to disappear by increasing penalties. We have to address the root causes to end these cycles. We have to do more to counter poverty and addiction. Addiction continues to be a plague, and overdoses are tearing families apart every single day across the state. But let's give last year's bipartisan fentanyl bill a chance to work. There will come a time to make changes and improvements, but let's do it based on science and data, not politics. How and at what level we support our public education system in Colorado also needs a mature and thoughtful debate. Let's build on the successes from the past years when we expanded access to universal preschool, full-day kindergarten, and invested historic levels of funding in our classrooms. Let's make another historic investment that isn't just a one-year windfall, but instead is done in a way that is sustainable and provides a long-term promise to our teachers, our students, and our parents. And likely the biggest issue, and potentially the most difficult one to solve, is the runaway cost that families and businesses are facing. Although it feels out of our hands at some points, let's choose to focus on the areas that we do have control over. When it comes to the cost of housing, Colorado is becoming less and less affordable each year. Let's work together and fix this problem before we turn into San Francisco. There's no question Colorado will continue to grow. People like living here, it turns out. But the real question is, how will we grow? Will it be done in a way that pushes people out of their communities and farther from where they work and play? Or will it be done in a way that prioritizes denser housing along transit corridors? It's not too late to pursue smart growth. Our air quality, our pocketbooks, and our entire quality of life depends on it. And of course, we will need to tackle all of these issues in an uncertain economic environment. It's likely to be a tough budget year as we settle into a reality of global economic conditions. Luckily, the Senate has 3 whip-smart members serving on the Joint Budget Committee. I know Senator Zenzinger will lead the committee with her usual combination of passion and preparedness, and will chart a course to fiscal prosperity for our state. Senator Bridges, you're exactly where you're supposed to be, and I'm excited to see you bring innovation and fresh thinking to our state's finances. And Senator Kirkmeyer, DC's loss is the JBC's gain. Thank you for doubling down on your investment here at home. We have so much work to do, but luckily we are equipped with the right leaders to get the job done. I'm proud to say that voters sent us the most diverse legislature in the history of Colorado to solve these problems. The Colorado General Assembly reflects the communities who sent us here. After this year's elections, we added more women and more diverse voices to both chambers. For the first time ever, there are more women than men serving in the General Assembly, a milestone that an incredible milestone that shows just how far our state has come since becoming the first state to approve women's suffrage at the ballot box. I'm also proud to note that in just a few short days, tribal leaders from the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe and the Southern Ute Indian Tribe will deliver their first annual address to a joint session of the General Assembly. Our tribal partners shouldn't be left on the sidelines when it comes to policymaking. They should be front and center because their priorities are Colorado's priorities. Including more voices into the halls of power matters, and we should always be asking ourselves which voices are being left out. We have more work to do on that front, so let's take stock in how far we've come, and then continue to identify how we can make this a more inclusive and accessible institution for all. And we should give credit where credit's due, because this is an area where our Republican friends across the aisle have also made incredible progress. For the first time since I became a legislator, you now officially have more women in your caucus than you have men named Kevin. In all seriousness, the Senate in recent years has enjoyed remarkable stability and functionality. Our 2 caucuses have real disagreements, sure, but we've learned how to communicate with respect. After a rather rocky start, previous Senate leadership, I don't know who they were able to forge a working relationship based on openness and trust, and the body and our state was so much better for it. Senator Lundin, I credit your calm and mature temperament for much of this functionality. You've taught me that when things get heated, it's probably best to take a breather and talk. I look forward to our continued partnership with you in your new role this session. But of course, a huge reason why this chamber has had so much success recently is in large part because of my work husband, Majority Leader Moreno. Senator Moreno, the respect you've garnered from every single person in this chamber, your commitment to this institution, and your intelligence make you the natural leader that this institution deserves. Thank you for your tireless work and all that you'll do for Colorado this coming session. I couldn't ask for a better partner in crime. But before I wrap up, I want to leave you with this. These jobs are hard. There are going to be a lot of late nights, hard conversations, difficult votes, You'll get into arguments, disagree with friends, and be disappointed in your colleagues. No doubt you'll disappoint your family when the nights get long and you miss dinner or bedtime. But it's also a unique, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and one that should never be taken for granted. So take a moment now and then, maybe during a quiet night in your office or an early morning on the floor, to pause and remember why you're here. I trust some of you will remind me to do that from time to time as well. With only 119 left, our days are numbered. Let's use them to their fullest because we have our work cut out for us. I hope more often than not, we will do it together rather than apart. But what matters most is that we deliver for the people of Colorado. And I'm really excited to show them that we can have a lot of fun while we do it. Thank you.